Hey everyone, in this tutorial, we're going to create an expensive looking wine product visualization. We'll cover everything from modeling the bottle and label to adding textures and setting up the scene. Let's jump right in. All right, first things first, select everything in the scene and hit delete to clear it out. I'm enabling these screencast keys so you guys can see what buttons I press down in the bottom left corner. Now for today's tutorial, we're switching things up a bit. We'll be using a reference image to help with our model. So press Shift and then navigate to Image and select Reference. I'll link the project files in the description below so you can download them and follow along. Just click the link and grab them. Once you've selected your reference image, add it to the scene. Now we need to align it properly. Press N to bring up the side panel. Go to the Item properties and hover over the X, Y, and Z values. Click and drag down to highlight them all at once, then press 0 to reset the position of the reference image. Next, we need to rotate it on the X-axis. Find the X value, click it, and type in 90. This will rotate the image 90 degrees. Now let's move it up a little. Press G, then Z, and move it up until it's right where you want it. To ensure we don't accidentally select the reference image later on, go to the Object properties and uncheck Selectable. Then under Data properties, change Depth from Default to Back so the reference image stays in the background. Now we can start modeling the wine bottle. Hit Shift and A, go to Mesh and add a circle. Set the vertices to 16 so it's smooth. After that, jump into edit mode by pressing Tab and hit to scale the circle so it matches the bottom of your reference image. All right, now that we have our base shape, it's time to extrude and align it to our reference image. To do this, hit E to extrude, then press Z to move it up along the Z axis. After that, hit S to scale it down a bit. We'll repeat this process. E, then Z, and then S to scale. If you want to see the reference image better, hit Alt-Z to toggle X-ray mode, which will allow you to see through your geometry. Now keep extruding and scaling E, Z, S until you cover the entire reference image. I don't want to bore you with the details, so I'll fast forward through this part. All right, now that we're done with the extrusions, let's tidy up a bit. We can get rid of the reference image. Go to the outliner, select your reference image, and click the eye icon to hide it from the viewport. Then click the camera icon to hide it from the final render. Now let's fill in the bottom of the bottle. Select this edge here, hit E, then S to scale it, and repeat that, E, a few times. Now press Ctrl F to open the face menu and choose Grid Fill to fill in the bottom nicely. Next, let's do the same for the top of the bottle. Select the edge at the top, hit E, and scale it down. Then press E again to adjust it, and after that, press Ctrl F once more to select Grid Fill for the top. Now we need to adjust the top part of our bottle by adding loop cuts. Press Ctrl R to add a loop cut and slide it right above the top edge. Let's add 3 more loop cuts underneath it. Finally, select these faces here and hit Alt-E. Choose Extrude Faces along normals and just extrude it a tiny bit to give it that finishing touch. Now let's jump back into object mode. With the wine bottle selected, hit Ctrl 2 to add a subdivision surface modifier and then click Shade Smooth to give it that nice, polished look. All right, we're done with our wine bottle, so let's move on to creating the label for it. With the wine bottle still selected, enter Edit mode by pressing Tab. Now hit Ctrl R to add a few loop cuts around the area where the label will go. Next, select the faces for the label. Just like this, make sure they're highlighted. Once selected, hit Shift D to duplicate these faces, and then right-click to snap it back in place. Now hit P and choose Separate by Selection. This will create a separate object for the label. Let's go back to object mode. Now, select the face we just separated, the label, and hit G followed by Y to move it just a little bit forward, positioning it right in front of the bottle. Now we need to parent the label to the bottle. So first, select the label, hold Shift, and then select the bottle. Now hit Control P and choose Object, Keep Transform. This way, whenever we move the bottle, the label will move along with it. All right, now it's time to model our chain. For that, we're going to use a torus. So hit Shift A and add a torus to the scene. Change the major segments to 16 since we don't need too many for our chain. Then adjust the minor radius to about 0.4. Just like that. Now let's jump into Edit mode. To solo the object, hit the backslash key on your keyboard. Next, press Alt-Z to enter X-ray mode and select half of the torus. Once you've selected it, extrude it along the X-axis. All right, now hit A to select everything, then press Shift-D to duplicate it. Rotate the duplicated piece 90 degrees on the X-axis and move it halfway to position it correctly. Just like that, we now have our chain link. Let's tab back into Object mode and then click on Shade Smooth to give it a polished finish. Now this is what we'll be using for the whole chain. In Edit mode, select everything and scale it down just a bit. We can also move it into position here. Next, we need to create a curve around our bottle. So select the bottle, then hit Shift A, go to Curves, and choose Spiral Fit Curve. If you don't see this option under your curves, go to Edit, Preferences, then under Add-ons, search for Extra Curves and make sure it's enabled. Once you've added your spiral fit curve, let's adjust some settings. Change the spirals to 8 and adjust the offset to about 0.6. I think that looks good. Also, change the spirals to 6, just like this. All right. Now select the chain again. I want to show you something important. When you move the chain, you'll notice that the origin is not positioned in the geometry. So we need to bring the chain's origin to its geometry. To do this, select the chain, go to Object, then Set Origin, and choose Origin to Geometry. Now when we move our curve, you can see the curve's origin is right here. Next, we need to bring the curve's origin to match the origin of the chain. To do that, select the chain, then press Shift-S and choose Cursor to Selected. This action will move the 3D cursor to the chain's origin. Now select the curve. Again, go to Object, then Set Origin and select Origin to 3D Cursor. Now, the origins of both the chain and the curve are aligned perfectly. Next, with the chain selected, we're going to add a few modifiers to it. First, let's add an array modifier. Adjust the relative offset until you get something that looks like this. Then change the fit type to Fit Curve and use the eyedropper tool to select the curve we just created. Now let's add a curve modifier as well. Use the eyedropper tool again to select our curve. This will wrap the chain around our object nicely. However, we can see that the chain is too big, so we need to reduce its size. To do this, select the chain, then switch to Edit mode and scale it down just a bit. Just like this. All right, now we have something nice going on. All right, now it's time to texture our object. First, let's create a space for our shader editor. We'll also create another space for the UV editor. But before we dive into texturing, we need to parent everything to the bottle. So let's drag and select all the objects in the scene. Now hold Shift and select the bottle, making it the active object. You can tell it's active by the brighter outline in the outliner compared to the rest of the objects. Now press Ctrl-P and select Object Keep Transform. This way, when we move the bottle, everything will move along with it. Next, let's switch to Material Preview mode and start adding our textures. First, select the bottle, then add a new material. Change the base color to a darker gray and set the roughness to 0. Now, under the transmission settings, I'd increase the transmission weight to 1. Great. Next, we need to create the design for the top part of the bottle. To do this, create a new slot under the material slots. Click the plus sign to create a new material slot, then add a new material. Make sure the bottle is selected. Now let's switch back to object mode so you can see what we're doing here. Select the top middle vertex, then hit Ctrl+ on your numpad a few times to grow your selection. With those faces selected, go to the material slot and make sure the second material you created is active. Now, click Assign to apply it to those selected faces. This will assign the material to the parts we just selected. You can see the results by switching back to Material Preview mode, just like this. Alright, now we're going to add an image texture, a copper foil image texture. I'll also link this image texture in the description, so if you want to follow along, feel free to use it. With the principled BSDF shader selected, press Ctrl-Shift-T. Now, before that shortcut works, you need to ensure that the Node Wrangler add-on is enabled. To do this, go to Edit, then Preferences, and under the Add-ons section, search for Node Wrangler. Make sure it's enabled. Once you've done that, select your principled BSDF again, hit Ctrl-Shift-T, and then locate your image texture. Drag and select all 4 texture files like this, and click OK. This will automatically link the appropriate textures to the principled BSDF, saving you a ton of work. Now with the bottle still selected, let's jump back into Edit mode. Ensure the area where the copper foil is located is still selected. If it's not, just go to the material slot and ensure the second material is active, then click Select. This will highlight all the faces assigned to that material. Now that we have all these faces selected, hit U and choose Smart UV Project. Click OK. This will unwrap our faces without much hassle. When we switch back to Material Preview mode, you can see how nicely our copper foil is unwrapped. And that's it for the copper foil. Next, let's move on to the label. Select the label and let's add a new material. For the label, I'll be using my own design. Just like I mentioned earlier, it's in the description if you want to download it and follow along. Now, it's time to add our image texture for the label. So first, let's hit Shift and T together. This will open the image texture dialog. Now, locate your label file on your computer and select it. Let's switch to Edit mode by pressing the Tab key. Once we're in Edit mode, we need to select everything. Next, we'll unwrap the label. To do this, press U on your keyboard, and then choose Unwrap from the menu that appears. This will allow us to see how our label is laid out in UV space. Now you'll notice that our label isn't aligned perfectly. Let's fix that. First, press A again to ensure everything is selected. Now to rotate the label, press the R key and then type 90 to rotate it 90 degrees. You can continue rotating until it aligns perfectly with the desired area. Next, we need to clean up some parts of our UV layout. Switch to Edge Select mode by pressing the 2 key on your keyboard. Alternatively, you can click on the Edge Select icon in the top left corner of the interface. Now, select this edge here. Once it's selected, press the S key to scale, then hit the Y key to restrict it to the Y-axis, and finally type 0. This action will flatten that edge. Now, let's move to the bottom edge. Then press S followed by Y and again type 0 to flatten it. Now select this edge on the side, press S for scale, then X to constrain it to the X-axis, and type 0, 0 once more. And do the same for this last edge here. Now we have our square perfectly aligned. Next, let's switch to Face Select mode by pressing the 3 key. Select this face and then press L to select all linked faces to that one. Now ensure that this face is still active. Press F3 to bring up the search menu, then type Follow Active Quads and hit Enter to select it. When you hit OK, our UV layout should now be perfectly aligned. Now to adjust it further, press the G key to grab it and move it around until it fits nicely. If you notice that our label is upside down, let's correct that. Press R to rotate and type 180 to flip it 180 degrees. Finally, if the label is flipped, select everything in the UV layout again by hitting A, then press followed by X. Move your mouse to flip the UV until it looks correct. Alright, now we're done with our label, but we need to add a few materials to make it look more realistic. So, with the label material selected, let's drag these nodes over a bit to make space. Next, we want to add a color ramp. So press Shift and A together to open the Add menu, then navigate to Converter and choose Color Ramp. Now connect the color output of the label to the factor input of the color ramp. To preview it, hold down Ctrl and Shift, and then left-click on the color ramp. You should now see the preview of the color ramp in the shader editor. Let's adjust the color ramp sliders until you get something that looks nice. Next, we'll connect the color ramp to the roughness input of the principled BSDF shader. The idea here is to make the black part rough and the golden part shiny. To achieve this, we need to flip our color ramp. So let's drag this slider here to flip it and move this one accordingly. All right, now we're starting to have something nice coming together. Next, we'll connect the same color ramp to the metallic factor of the principled BSDF shader. However, we have a slight issue. Let's unplug the metallic input for a moment and see what's going on. Now, bump the metallic value up to 1. This should give us a more metallic look. Next, let's add some texture for depth. Press Shift and A again, then navigate to Texture and choose Noise Texture. Now, select the color ramp you just created and press Shift and D to duplicate it. With the new color ramp selected, hit Backspace to reset it. Connect the factor output of the noise texture to the factor input of the new color ramp. Now, let's change the scale of the noise texture to about 15 and increase the roughness to 1. Finally, adjust the color ramp sliders so we have a textured effect that complements our label. All right, next up, let's hit Shift and A together again to open the Add menu. This time, we're going to add a bump node. Connect the color output of the color ramp into the height input of the bump node. Now take the normal output of the bump node and connect it to the normal input of the principled BSDF shader. Next, let's adjust the strength of the bump node. Reduce it to about 0.1. If you find that it's still a bit too much, we can increase the scale of our noise texture to around 80. Let's preview it and see how it looks. All right, now let's go back and reduce the bump strength to 0.05. That looks much better. Now it's time to texture our chain. So select the chain object and then add a new material to it. Let's give it a nice golden yellow color, just like this. Increase the metallic value to 1 and set the roughness to 0 to achieve that shiny golden chain effect. Next, let's set up our camera. We'll drag this area down a bit and switch this back to our 3D viewport. Add a camera, press Ctrl, Alt, and 0 on your numpad to align the camera to your current view. Now hit N to bring up the side menu. Under the View tab, make sure to check the box that says Lock Camera to View. This will allow us to adjust our camera position easily. Now let's adjust our camera for the best angle. Now let's hit N to bring up the side menu, and let's uncheck that button so we don't accidentally move our camera while we're working. Next, I want some of the chain to be in the foreground. To do this, let's increase this space a bit for better visibility. Now, select the curve we created for the chain. Remember, that's the curve, not the chain itself. Once in edit mode, let's select the last vertex at the top like this. Now hit E to extrude it. You can rotate it if you'd like by hitting R, then move it into place. Hit E again to extrude, and let's move it up here. You can hit R again to rotate the chain and adjust it to your liking. Continue with E to extrude as needed. So now we have something like this going on. Remember, you don't have to do all of this. It's purely a matter of preference. If you want to add some flair, go for it. If not, that's perfectly fine too. Next, let's add some light to our scene. So let's switch to the rendered view now. Next, we need to change the rendering engine from Eevee to cycles. If you have a GPU, let's also change the rendering device to GPU. If not, that's perfectly fine. Now, we can see we're having a slight issue with the rendering. To check what's going on, let's look at our face orientation. Go to the overlays and check the face orientation option. Now we can see our bottle is red while the other items are blue. This indicates that the face orientation or normals is incorrect, so we need to fix that. Let's jump into edit mode, hit A to select everything, then press Ctrl-Shift-N Shore. This will open a pop-up menu. Make sure to check the inside option to flip the normals. We'll do the same thing for the label. Select the label, go into edit mode, hit A to select everything, press Ctrl-Shift-N again, and check the inside checkbox to flip those normals as well. Once that's done, we can turn off our face orientation and everything should look just fine. Next, let's add some lights to our scene. To do this, let's bring our 3D cursor back to the world origin by hitting Shift and selecting Cursor to World Origin. Now, let's add an area light. Move it up just like this, rotate it, and then scale it on the X-axis, just like this. Let's also scale it up on the Y-axis. Now, under the light properties, let's increase the power to 200. I think that's too much. Let's reduce it to 150. All right, now let's select the light we have here and hit Shift D to duplicate it. Next, let's rotate it like this. Now hit G and bring it right below the bottle, just like this. After that, hit S and then Y to scale it down a bit, making it a little narrower. Now, select the first light we created again and press Shift D to duplicate it once more. Right-click to snap it back in place, and then let's rotate it. Hit R and then X twice to rotate it on its local X-axis, just like this. Now let's move it in front of the bottle. Next, hit S and then Y twice to scale it on the local Y-axis, just like this. Let's reduce the power of this light to 100 Dard. Actually, let's make it 80 for a softer effect. Now let's add a plane. Press Shift A and then select Mesh, Plane. Let's rotate it 90 degrees and move it up behind our object just like this. Now hit Ch to scale it up. Next, let's give the plane a very dark color and set its roughness to about 0.3. Or let's say 0.5, just like that. Lastly, before we render our scene, we need to add an HDRI for better lighting. Go to the World Properties tab, click on the yellow color here, and select Add an Environment Texture. For this tutorial, I'm going to use Blender's default Studio HDRI. Locate it, and this will give us some nice lights to work with. Finally, let's select our camera. If you can't select it directly, you can find it in the outliner on the right side. We'll add a depth of field by going to the camera settings and using the eyedropper tool to select the bottle as the focus object. Set the f-stop to about 2.5, just like that. Now we can set our render samples. Go to the Render Properties tab and set your samples. I'm going with 200. But you can choose whatever sample count works best for your PC's capabilities. Now let's render out our image. And there you have it. We've successfully modeled, textured, and rendered a beautiful wine bottle with a chain. I hope you enjoyed following along and learned some useful techniques in Blender. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Don't hesitate to share your own creations in the comments below and let me know if you have any questions or topics you'd like to see covered in future tutorials. Thanks for watching and happy blending.